It begins not with a revelation but with a silence so deep that it seems to hum beneath a stone, beneath the desert, beneath the heartbeat of time itself. The Great Sphinx of Giza, a face half human, half lion, has watched civilizations rise and fall, yet its eyes have never blinked. What does it remember that we've forgotten? What language does it speak in the hush of night when the wind brushes against its ancient skin? Before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. Tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Let's drift together into the sand and the dark below the lion's pores. For centuries, the Sphinx was nothing more than a buried head emerging from dunes, its massive body lost under centuries of shifting sand. Only the top of its head, worn smooth by the desert wind, was visible when Napoleon's troops arrived in Egypt in 1798. They saw it as a relic, perhaps older than Egypt itself. But no one then could imagine that beneath that head lay a secret deeper than stone. It wasn't until the 20th century that technology began to listen to what the sands had hidden. In 1991, a team of researchers from the Stanford Research Institute and Egyptian archaeologists conducted ground-penetrating radar studies around the Sphinx. The results were startling. Beneath the monument, beneath the pores and extending toward the real haunches were anomalies, hollow cavities, symmetrical and deliberate in shape. They weren't natural fissures in the rock, they were chambers. The data was clear, but almost as soon as it was released, discussion was silenced. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities denied further exploration. The findings vanished from public record. Why? What could possibly rest beneath a sphinx that a nation would prefer the world not to see? It is strange how history sometimes behaves like a guardian, not revealing truth, but concealing it. Ancient Egypt was a civilization obsessed with continuity, preservation, and the bridging of worlds. Yet under this monument, there is something that threatens to rewrite its own chronology. For if those chambers are man-made, and if their age predates the Old Kingdom, then the entire foundation of Egyptian history must be reimagined. Whispers of these discoveries traveled quietly through academic circles in the early 1990s, until they reached independent researchers who refused to let the silence settle. Dr. Thomas Tobeki and Dr. Robert Schoch, both geophysicists, confirmed that the patterns indeed suggested voids, possibly connected tunnels. Their seismic data hinted at something older, something weathered by water rather than wind. But again, permits to excavate were denied. The official narrative remained firm. There's nothing beneath the Sphinx but bedrock. And yet, the instrument said otherwise. Imagine standing there at dusk, the golden light sliding down the lion's flank, the pyramids behind casting long solemn shadows. The air cools, but the ground below hums faintly, like a restrained breath. What if the Sphinx is not merely carved from stone, but carved around something, a marker placed atop an entrance to memory? In 1993, John Anthony West, who had long questioned the orthodox timeline of Egypt's monuments, called the Sphinx a riddle written in erosion. He believed it was older than dynastic Egypt, perhaps by thousands of years. The weathering patterns on its body spoke of water, not sand. Torrential rain, flowing channels, rounded grooves, all impossible in the Sahara of the last 5,000 years. The Sphinx, he argued, must have existed when the land was still green, perhaps 10,000 years ago. If that were true, it would predate the very dawn of known civilization. It would mean that the builders of the Sphinx belonged to a forgotten epoch, one erased from the visible record, but not from the earth itself. Soon after these claims gained traction, Egyptian authorities grew uneasy. Zahi Hawass, then rising in prominence as a guardian of Egypt's antiquities, dismissed such theories as fantasy. There is nothing under the Sphinx, he said, only solid limestone. Yet years later, in interviews, he would admit that there were indeed small tunnels and hollows, though they were declared natural. The contradiction lingered, half-spoken like a riddle left deliberately unsolved. Tourists see the Sphinx as a monument of majesty, but archaeologists who listen differently sense a tension beneath it, between what is seen and what is known. The monument sits precisely on the east-west axis, its gaze fixed toward the rising sun. Every morning it greets the rebirth of light, as if remembering a covenant older than God's. Beneath it, somewhere in the cool belly of limestone, lies the possibility of a chamber untouched from millennia, a sealed silence within the silence. And what if something rests there? Not treasure, not gold, but a record. Ancient texts speak of hidden archives beneath sacred places, holes that preserve the memory of a world before the flood. The hole of records mentioned in Hermetic and later esoteric traditions was said to contain the wisdom of the ages before time, buried to protect it from human corruption. Such tales were dismissed as myth, but myths often begin as distorted memories. What would happen if Egypt unearthed something that didn't fit the accepted order of history? Something that hinted humanity's story was older, more cyclical, more mysterious than we are allowed to imagine. The sands are quiet now. The official tours walk above the ground, not below. The air hums with heat, a scent of dust, and the strange certainty that the desert remembers everything, even what we choose to forget. In 2023, renewed scanning projects again hinted at hidden structures beneath the plateau, patterns of voids and unexpected densities. The data was published briefly, then withdrawn. The more technology we have, the more silence seems to follow discovery. It is as though the Sphinx itself commands that silence, as though it whispers, in the unspoken language of stone, "You're not ready." And perhaps we are not. For what sleeps beneath the paws of the lion may not be a relic, but a warning. A reminder that every civilization builds atop the bones of another. That beneath every truth we stand on there is a hollow, waiting to speak. When the wind stills and the desert grows cold, one might imagine hearing the faint echo of that hollow. Not empty, but listening. So the question lingers beneath the weight of sand and centuries. If the Sphinx guards something beneath its pores, then who or what does it guard it from? It is strange how silence can echo louder than sound. The sand around the Sphinx hums faintly at night, as if beneath it something stirs, restless but patient. Those who once dared to probe deeper spoke of a void, a chamber, hidden beneath the lion's immense paws. But in Egypt, mysteries often end not with revelation, but with restriction. In the years after the first seismic scans revealed hollow anomalies, the Egyptian authorities halted all excavations under the monument. Officially, the decision was to preserve heritage. Unofficially, it was to preserve control. The idea of a hidden chamber beneath the Sphinx did not begin with radar or modern science. It had been whispered about for centuries, a rumor older than archaeology itself. The Greeks believed that beneath the Giza plateau lay a labyrinth of passages, the entrance to which was sealed by the priests of ancient times. Arab chroniclers in the Middle Ages spoke of tunnels filled with inscriptions, older than the flood. And then, in the 20th century, the rumor was reborn through the voice of a man who had never seen Egypt, the American clairvoyant Edgar Cayce. Cayce, in a trance, spoke of a hole of records buried beneath the right paw of the Sphinx, a vault preserving the knowledge of a lost civilization destroyed by flood. He claimed it would be discovered when humanity was ready to understand its past anew. His words were dismissed as mysticism. Yet strangely, when modern instruments later detected voids in precisely that location, some began to wonder if myth and science had brushed fingertips. Was Cayce delusional, or was he remembering something that history had forgotten? The notion of a subterranean archive, a place where truth was hidden rather than destroyed, has haunted Egyptology for decades. Within the Hermetic tradition, said to preserve the teachings of Thoth, or Hermes Trismegistus. There is a passage describing a vault where all the wisdom of the ages is stored for those who will come after the great deluge. This image of knowledge safeguarded from catastrophe recurs in many traditions. The Sumerian tablets that survived the flood, the Tibetan caves said to house cosmic scrolls, even the biblical Ark of the Covenant is a vessel of divine instruction. Perhaps all these stories point to one archetype, that somewhere in the deep earth lies a record of what came before us. In the late 1970s, researchers reported faint tunnels beneath the Sphinx, extending toward the Pyramid of Khafra. Photographs taken during early excavations showed sealed doors, carved stone corridors, and what appeared to be hieroglyphic marks erased or plastered over. Yet none of this entered official documentation. The narrative was cleaned, sterilized, reissued. Egypt, whose history had already been rewritten many times, would not allow another rewriting, especially one that might undermine the chronology on which its cultural identity rested. For those who look deeper, the pattern feels deliberate. In 1996, Zahi Hawass publicly denied the existence of any chamber, calling the idea nonsense. Yet, years later, in a quietly circulated interview, he admitted there was a cavity beneath the pores. But it is not man-made, he insisted. He described it as natural fissures. Even then, the description wavered between denial and evasion, as though the truth had been classified. It is easy to dismiss conspiracy, yet it is harder to ignore the consistency of suppression. Each time new evidence emerges, access is restricted. Each time a new theory suggests that the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt, funding evaporates. The keepers of knowledge, it seems, are guarding not just stone, but narrative. What might they fear? If the chamber beneath the Sphinx were proven to be artificial, if inscriptions or artifacts within pointed to a civilization older than Egypt, one capable of monumental architecture and astronomical design, it would dismantle the linear timeline of human progress. It would suggest that history is not a ladder, but a circle. That knowledge has risen and fallen like tides, that we have forgotten far more than we have learned. In the 1930s, British Egyptologist E.A. Wallace Budge hinted that Egypt's priesthood inherited, rather than created, its wisdom. He wrote that the earliest magicians and builders were not of Egyptian stock, but strangers who came before the flood. The statement was largely ignored, filed away among eccentric commentaries. But what if Budge was right? Ancient Egyptian texts sometimes speak of the Zep Tepi, the first time. It was not a mythic dawn, but a memory, a golden age when the gods walked with men, when the land was green, and when the great temples were founded according to the pattern of the sky. The priests of later dynasties said their ancestors built according to those divine blueprints, not by invention, but by imitation. They called themselves keepers of the measure. If Zep Tepi was not legend but history, then the Sphinx might not be Egyptian at all, merely adopted into its mythos, like a relic inherited from a vanished world. The image of a lion facing east, aligned with the constellation Leo, is older than the pharaohs. In 2500 BCE, the constellation Leo rose on the horizon, precisely where the Sphinx now gazes. Could this alignment be accidental? Or could it mark the memory of a time before time, when this monument served as a cosmic marker for the survivors of a cataclysm? Beneath the pores, some have claimed, is a sealed entrance, an aperture long buried. During restoration work in 1926, photographs captured an opening between the forelegs leading into the limestone base. The passage was later filled and forgotten. The official explanation: structural weakness. But what if the entrance led downward? The possibility alone unsettles those who guard Egypt's monuments. For in the deep underground of Giza there are catacombs, some mapped, most unexplored, stretching toward the Nile. The late explorer Andrew Collins documented a series of natural caves beneath the plateau, large enough to house chambers, sealed corridors, perhaps even what the ancients called the House of Osiris. In one photograph, Hieroglyphs carved onto a blocked doorway depict the symbol of the lion, guardian of thresholds. Could the Sphinx have been placed deliberately atop that gate to guard it forever? It is said that all who have tried to pierce the secret have been silenced, not by curse, but by bureaucracy. Excavations denied, permits revoked, archives locked. Silence has become the Sphinx's truest servant, and yet the sands shift. Technology improves. Each decade brings instruments more sensitive, capable of detecting the faintest void. Every time the machines hum, the same patterns reappear beneath the pores, a rectangular cavity, perfectly centered. And each time, the findings are quietly buried under reports that never see print. Perhaps what lies beneath the Sphinx is not a threat to history, but to the illusion of its completeness. To admit a missing chapter is to admit that we know almost nothing. The desert keeps its promises, it buries, but it also preserves. If a hall of records exists, it may not be waiting for discovery. It may be waiting for permission. Permission not from Egypt, but from us. From the human mind, which still trembles before the thought that our story may have begun long before writing, long before stone, long before the gods themselves. Beneath the pores of the Sphinx, the forgotten chamber remains sealed, not by stone, but by fear. And in that silence, one question breathes quietly through the sand. If the truth of our origin sleeps there, who decided we should never wake it? The Sphinx does not weep, yet the marks on its body speak of water. Deep vertical grooves and rounded channels scar its limestone skin, as though rivers once caressed it, or storms once battered its flanks. These are not the wounds of wind. They are the memory of rain, rain that has not touched the Giza Plateau for more than 7,000 years. And in that single geological contradiction lies one of the most haunting enigmas of human history. For most of the 20th century, the official story was simple. The Great Sphinx was carved around 2500 BCE, during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, builder of the Second Pyramid. Its lion's body and human head symbolize royal power, a fusion of might and wisdom. But the stone does not lie, even when the historians do. In 1991, a quiet American geologist named Robert Schoch examined the erosion patterns on the Sphinx and came to a conclusion that shattered this elegant narrative. He saw water. Schoch, trained to read landscapes as living archives, recognized that the type of erosion covering the Sphinx was not caused by sand or wind, but by long-term heavy rainfall, the kind that falls over centuries in a temperate climate, not a desert. He compared the weathering on the Sphinx with that on nearby tombs, built from the same rock but cut in later dynasties. The difference was unmistakable. The Sphinx's erosion ran deep, curving, vertical, sculpted by cascading water. The others showed sharp horizontal weathering shaped by millennia of arid wind. The implications were terrifyingly vast. If the Sphinx bore the marks of rain, then it must have been carved before Egypt became a desert, before 5000 BCE, possibly as far back as 10,000 BCE. That would mean that the monument predates not only Khafre, but the entire known span of Egyptian civilization. It would mean that its builders were unknown, their names erased, their existence forgotten. When Schoch presented his findings at the Geological Society of America in 1992, he expected debate. Instead, he encountered outrage. Egyptologists, fiercely protective of their established chronology, rejected the idea outright. Zahi Hawass dismissed him as a man who knows rocks, not history. But the irony is that rocks remember better than people. Schoch was not alone. John Anthony West, the maverick Egyptological researcher who first invited Schoch to study the monument, believed the Sphinx belonged to a civilization lost in the deep time of prehistory, perhaps the same epoch Plato described as Atlantis. West called it the fingerprint of a forgotten science. For him, the erosion wasn't merely geological. It was symbolic, an imprint of an ancient world washed away by the flood that legends still mourn. Mainstream archaeologists fought back with ferocity. They claimed the erosion came from groundwater, not rainfall, that it could be explained without rewriting history. Yet groundwater erosion creates patterns at the base, not the head. It seeps, it doesn't cascade. The stone story refused to conform. The argument grew not only scientific but ideological. If Shah was right, the foundations of human history, our slow climb from hunter-gatherers to city builders, would have to be rewritten. Civilization would no longer be a miracle of 3000 BCE, but the rebirth of something older, something cyclic. And that idea was unacceptable. In the early 1990s, the Egyptian Antiquities Organization tightened control over Giza. Access to the Sphinx enclosure was restricted. Permits for independent researchers vanished. The very site where geology whispered of an earlier age became a fortress of silence. Those who asked too loudly were branded heretics. But the rocks kept speaking. Satellite images showed similar weathering on nearby limestone cliffs cut by ancient rains. Deep beneath Cairo, geological cores confirmed that between 10,000 and 7,000 BCE, the region had indeed been lush, watered by monsoon systems long since gone. The Sahara was once green, a cradle, not a grave. Could it be that the Sphinx was carved when Egypt was not yet desert, when rivers flowed across its plains and forests crowned its ridges? The question haunted Shah. He returned to Giza several times, measuring, re-examining, recalculating. The evidence remained the same. Every groove, every rounded hollow, every softened edge of limestone told the same story. Water falling from the sky. What kind of world existed then, 10,000 years ago, capable of carving such a monument? No known culture, no pottery, no writing, no tools from that epoch could account for such mastery of engineering, symmetry, and astronomical precision. Unless the Sphinx was not a creation of a forgotten people, but a survivor of them. The myth of Atlantis speaks of a mighty civilization drowned by flood around 9600 BCE, the same period suggested by the Sphinx's erosion. Plato's account, often dismissed as allegory, matches the geological record almost too well. At the end of the last ice age, vast floods swept across continents. Sea levels rose more than 100 meters, and entire landscapes vanished beneath the waves. Could the Sphinx have been a marker, a monument left by survivors, a memory in stone of a world that perished? The Egyptians themselves seemed to believe their wisdom came from an age before their own. The priests of Ses told Solom that Egypt had preserved the memory of the earlier ages lost to the Greeks. "You Greeks are children," they said. "You have no old men among you." Egypt's temples were built on the remnants of something older still, a sacred geography inherited from a vanished age. The Sphinx, they said, was Ra Harakati, the sun in its horizon, the guardian of the dawn. Perhaps that dawn was not metaphorical. Perhaps it was the literal sunrise after a cataclysmic night. In later centuries, the weathered lines of the Sphinx were patched, smoothed, rebuilt. Pharaohs carved inscriptions to claim ownership, the hieroglyphs covering surfaces already ancient. The face was recut, perhaps reshaped into a likeness of Khafra, hiding the true identity beneath. Each restoration was not merely repair but overwriting, a palimpsest of power. Yet the erosion on the back and flanks cannot be erased. It remains as testimony to an age when rain fell where desert now burns. And so the Sphinx becomes both monument and witness, not to one civilization, but to many. Beneath its worn surface lies the trace of a pre-human memory, a world that breathed before ours. If the geologists are correct, the Sphinx was built in a climate utterly different from today's, carved perhaps as a message, perhaps as a warning. A lion watching the rising sun of Leo, a marker of the procession, of time's endless turning. Those who carved it may have known that the sky itself would one day move on. that their world would drown and ours would forget. What does it mean when stone remembers what we do not? Perhaps the Sphinx does not belong to Egypt, but to the planet, an inheritance from a cycle long before the pharaohs, long before names, and if that is true, then the question that haunts Giza is no longer, who built it? But why was it left for us to find? For the water that shaped the Sphinx is gone, but its echoes remain. In every line carved by the vanished rain, the monument seems to murmur, "You have been here before." Maybe that is the real riddle, not who carved the lion, but how many times humanity has forgotten how to carve at all. And somewhere beneath the pores, in that forbidden hollow, perhaps the answer waits, patient as stone, ancient as rain. If the Sphinx truly predates the pharaohs, then its builders were not Egyptian, at least not in any sense that history recognizes. This thought alone unsettles the comfortable order of time. It implies a civilization lost not to conquest, but to forgetting. A people who carved with such precision that their monument still defies the desert's decay, yet who left no name, no language, no trace, only silence and stone. Who were they? Archaeologists recoil from that question. To ask it is to walk beyond the borders of what can be proven, and yet absence itself is evidence. If the Sphinx was indeed shaped when Egypt was green, its creators must have lived in a world unrecognizable to us, a Nile valley not of sand but of forest and floodplain, where rains fell from heavy skies and herds of antelope grazed among acacias. In that world, humanity was awakening from the Ice Age. The sea was lower, the constellations hung differently in the sky, and the knowledge to carve stone on such a scale should not have existed. But it did. In the 1990s, astronomer Robert Bauval noticed something extraordinary about the layout of the Giza Plateau. The three pyramids were not randomly arranged. They mirrored almost perfectly the three stars of Orion's belt, Al-Nitak, Al-Nilam, and Mintarka. Moreover, the alignment made sense not in the sky of the pharaoh's time, at around 10,500 BCE, the same epoch implied by Schacht's erosion data. In that distant age, the constellation Leo, the lion, rose precisely on the horizon where the Sphinx gazes. The pattern was elegant, impossible to dismiss. It was as if the entire plateau was designed as a map of the heavens, frozen in stone to mark a celestial event now lost to human memory. What mind conceives such harmony between earth and sky? Bauval's theory was ridiculed at first, dismissed as coincidence. But mathematics does not lie. The angular separation, the stellar precession, the exact orientation to the rising of Orion's belt at the meridian, all matched. The builders of Giza, it seemed, possessed astronomical knowledge thousands of years ahead of their supposed time. If the Sphinx marks Leo and the pyramids mark Orion, then the Nile itself mirrors the Milky Way, the river of stars flowing through heaven. It is a cosmogram, a sacred mirror. To design such a pattern required not only geometry, but philosophy, an understanding that Earth and cosmos reflect each other, that as above, so below. This phrase, as above, so below, would later appear in Hermetic texts attributed to Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, whom the Greeks called Hermes Trismegistus. But perhaps it was not invention, perhaps it was remembrance, a whisper from those who first mapped the heavens in stone. Whoever they were, they understood scale not as size, but as resonance. The dimensions of the Great Pyramid encode the ratio of the Earth's circumference to its polar radius. The Sphinx faces due east with less than half a degree of deviation, a precision only modern instruments can measure. And if its construction truly belongs to a forgotten age, then our ancestors' ignorance is a myth we tell ourselves to feel unique. What if intelligence did not begin with us, but returned to us? Some researchers speak of an archaic science, not mechanical but harmonic, in which architecture, sound, and celestial motion were parts of a single language. The Sphinx in this view was not merely sculpture, but a tuning fork of stone. Its proportions follow the golden ratio. Its alignment interacts with the solstices and equinoxes. Even the subterranean cavities beneath it could have amplified sound or energy. Rituals of resonance rather than technology. This may sound mystical, but even NASA's physicists admit that stone, vibration, and geometry can affect fields of sound and magnetism. The ancients may have used what we call acoustics to awaken something within space itself, an architecture of frequency. Perhaps the Sphinx is not only the guardian of the past, but also the echo of an experiment, a bridge between mind and matter. But how could such knowledge vanish? How could a people who mastered the alignment of stars and stone disappear without leaving even a tool behind? The end of the Ice Age was not gentle. As glaciers melted, seas rose violently, swallowing coastlines, cities, and memory. What we call prehistory may simply be what remains after the flood's erasure. The fertile plains of the eastern Mediterranean drowned, and with them, the places that once pulsed with early light. What survived was not civilization, but fragments. Survivors wandering inland, carrying only myths of what had been lost. Perhaps these refugees of time brought their knowledge to the Nile, carved a symbol of their origin, the lion of the stars, and built it where sunrise would forever mark their remembrance. The Sphinx could have been a memorial, not a monument. In the myths of Egypt, the lion is a guardian of thresholds, the keeper between worlds. In the Book of the Dead, lions guard the gates of the underworld, where souls pass through judgment. In the stars, Leo guards the eastern sky, the door of dawn. Everywhere, the lion stands between darkness and light, memory and oblivion. It is not difficult to imagine the builders seeing themselves the same way, as guardians between ages, standing at the edge of one world's destruction and another's birth. Their monument was their promise, that knowledge, once carved, would never die completely. And yet, the irony endures. We have found their stones, but not their names. We admire their skill, but deny their existence. Modern history refuses to acknowledge that intelligence might precede civilization. We prefer a story where progress begins with us, where the line of time moves only forward. But perhaps time is a circle, and the builders of the Sphinx once stood where we stand now, confident, proud, unaware that the tide of forgetting would rise again. If we listen closely, the Sphinx seems to murmur beneath a desert wind, not with words, but with weight. Its stillness is a language, a geometry of silence, and in that silence, one can almost feel the presence of minds that looked up at the same stars we do and saw not chaos but memory. Were they gods, as the Egyptians later believed, or simply humans who remembered more than we do now? Maybe the distinction no longer matters, for to carve a lion facing the sunrise, aligned with the eternal heavens, is to declare that nothing ever truly ends, that civilizations may crumble, but the measure of the sky remains. And so, the Sphinx endures, half buried, half remembered, a riddle left by architects who built not for glory but for remembrance. What if their message was never meant to be read, but felt? Perhaps the Sphinx is not waiting for discovery, but for recognition. For the moment humanity looks again at the stars and remembers what it once knew, and when that happens, perhaps the sound itself will shift, and beneath the lion's paws, the architects from the edge of time will stir again, not as bodies, but as memory returning to light. Long before the tourists and their cameras, before the guides with their rehearsed myths, before the gates that fenced the plateau, there were priests, silent, deliberate, and bound by oaths older than empire. They walked among the shadows of the Sphinx as if among a living god. To them, this monument was not a mystery to be solved, but a covenant to be guarded. Whatever lay beneath its pores was not meant for the eyes of the ordinary. It was the sacred wound of the earth, sealed not with stone, but with secrecy. Every civilization needs its guardians of silence. In ancient Egypt, the priesthood served as both keepers of knowledge and protectors of ignorance. They decided what could be spoken, what could be carved, and what must remain hidden. To them, wisdom was not a gift for the masses, but a flame too dangerous to leave unguarded. The word for priest, himnecha, means servant of the god. Yet those who served often became masters of information, custodians of memory, and engineers of forgetting. When the pharaoh ruled by divine right, it was the priests who defined what divine meant. They read the stars, recorded floods, guided the dead through ritual, and interpreted dreams. But more than that, they controlled the metaphysics of Egypt, the delicate equilibrium between heaven and earth, between knowledge and chaos. The deeper truths of the temples, the alignments of the pyramids, and the rituals that once echoed in the subterranean chambers were never written plainly. They were encoded in geometry, rhythm, and sound, hidden within walls, chants, and myths, so that only the initiated could see the full pattern. Perhaps this is why no ancient text speaks directly of what lies beneath the Sphinx. To write it would have been betrayal. To reveal it would have been to tear the veil between gods and men. The Greeks, when they came later, found Egypt already ancient. They admired its order, its symmetry, its serene defiance of decay. Yet they sensed the presence of something unspoken. Plato wrote that the Egyptian priests held knowledge of floods and fires that had destroyed humanity many times before. Herodotus, too, spoke of underground chambers beneath temples, guarded from outsiders. But none could enter, none could verify. It was as if Egypt itself had conspired to protect its prehistory, as though secrecy was the oldest language it spoke. The Sphinx, in this sense, was not merely a monument, but a threshold, a stone manifestation of the priestly principle, the division between the known and the unknowable. Beneath its gaze, the rituals of initiation took place, a symbolic death of ignorance, the rebirth into sight. Those who passed through the mystery did not emerge with answers, but with deeper questions. To be enlightened in that world was to be trusted with the burden of silence. And so the Sphinx endured as an altar of restraint. Empires rose around it, but none dared to open the ground below. The priests of the Old Kingdom were replaced by the cults of Osiris and Ra, by Ptolemaic priests under Greek rule, and later by Coptic monks who carved crosses into its flanks. Yet the essential law remained. The secret must remain buried. Why? What truth could be so dangerous that it must be hidden across millennia? Some suggest it was political, that early dynasties feared the revelation of their borrowed glory, that they had inherited more than they had built. Others believe it was metaphysical, that beneath the Sphinx lies not an artifact, but a frequency, a field of power that must not be disturbed. A few even claim that the Sphinx guards the axis of the Earth's memory, the point where matter and consciousness once met. Whatever the reason, every attempt to probe its depths has met resistance. In the 1920s, French engineer Émile Barrès, tasked with restoring the monument, discovered a sealed door in the bedrock near its rump. He explored briefly, but his record vanished, his sketches never found. In the 1950s, Egyptian archaeologists unearthed a tunnel beneath a nearby temple of the Sphinx, leading toward its body. The entrance was quickly closed, the discovery dismissed as insignificant. In the 1990s, when seismic surveys hinted at a chamber beneath the pores, the government imposed new restrictions. No excavations, no independent verification, no dissent. It is as if the priesthood never ended, only changed its form. Where once the keepers wore linen and gold, now they wear suits and credentials. The oaths are bureaucratic, not sacred, but the silence is the same. Modern Egypt guards its monuments with the same jealousy that its ancestors guarded their gods, and perhaps rightly so. To open the Sphinx is to open history itself. It would mean facing not only what lies beneath, but what we have chosen not to see above. Imagine, for a moment, the ancient ceremony as once held at dusk. The last rays of the sun touching the Sphinx's brow, priests standing in perfect formation, their chants harmonizing with the vibration of stone. They believed that sound could awaken the monument, not physically but spiritually, that its body resonated with the earth's own pulse. The chants were not prayers, but equations. Each syllable corresponded to a measure of time, each breath a rhythm of the cosmos. To mispronounce was to risk disharmony, to awaken forces that must remain still. The Sphinx was both participant and instrument in this symphony, a bridge between worlds, and those who guarded it knew that bridges can collapse if crossed by the unready. Centuries later, when the old priesthood was destroyed by foreign rule, fragments of its knowledge survived, absorbed into Hermeticism, Gnosticism, and alchemy. Symbols of lions, suns, and eyes reappeared in temples of entirely different faiths, their meanings diluted but not erased. Even in medieval Europe, whispers persisted of Egyptian guardians who preserved forbidden truth through secret orders. Some believed the Freemasons inherited these mysteries. Others said the Vatican locked them away. Yet always the core remained unchanged. Knowledge must be earned, not given. Maybe that is the legacy of the Sphinx, not the chamber, not the prophecy, but the principle of concealment itself. To look upon it is to be reminded that truth cannot simply be uncovered like an artifact. It must be approached with reverence, patience, and fear. For even now, in the modern age, the Sphinx continues its role as teacher through silence. Scientists measure its erosion, tourists photograph its face, skeptics scoff at its legends, but the monument remains unmoved, unyielding, as if to say, "You may measure my stone, but you will not measure my meaning." Perhaps the priesthood was right. Perhaps some truths are not ready to be spoken, and yet the silence grows heavy. The world that once revered secrets now demands exposure. We dig, scan, and speculate, convinced that knowledge itself is salvation. But what if understanding the Sphinx means facing a mirror too vast, one that shows us the cycles of forgetting we ourselves perpetuate? In the night, when the desert wind falls still, the Sphinx seems almost to breathe. The stars rise above it in slow procession, the same stars its builders once traced. Somewhere beyond the reach of time, perhaps the old priests are still keeping watch, their oaths intact, their silence unbroken, and under their eternal gaze a single question lingers like sand suspended in air. If knowledge was once guarded so fiercely, was it to protect the secret, or to protect us from it? Beneath the stillness of the Sphinx there is a faint trembling, not of the earth, but of something older, slower, almost alive. Seismic instruments once caught it, rhythmic fluctuations, as if the ground itself were breathing. Scientists called it resonance. Others called it memory. But to those who have stood between the lion's colossal paws and felt that unexplainable vibration beneath their feet, it feels like the pulse of time itself, echoing from something buried deep below. It was in 1991 when the first seismic readings beneath the Sphinx stunned researchers. The data revealed a symmetrical cavity, rectangular in shape, nearly 20 meters beneath the surface. The anomaly extended eastward, toward the monument's chest, aligned perfectly with its central axis. It was not random, not natural, and certainly not the product of geological chance. To geophysicists, it looked deliberate, constructed. But before questions could form into excavations, the authorities intervened. The project was stopped, access revoked, reports sealed. This abrupt silence was not new. Beneath Egypt's surface lies a history of interruptions, discoveries halted just before revelation. In the case of the Sphinx, each new generation of explorers finds evidence of hollow spaces, tunnels, or corridors that seem to vanish the moment they are found, as if the monument itself decides when to be seen. Those who have studied the Sphinx closely speak of an uncanny symmetry. Its pores, outstretched like twin pillars, form a gateway between the seen and the unseen. Between them lies the dream stela, erected by Pharaoh Thutmose IV, who claimed the Sphinx spoke to him in his sleep, promising kingship if he freed it from the sands. The stela stands like a warning and a confession. Thutmose called the Sphinx Harmachis, the horizon of Horus, a being both celestial and terrestrial, both god and guardian. Perhaps his dream was not metaphor but memory. Perhaps the monument did speak, in vibrations, in frequencies that human consciousness can only perceive in the threshold between waking and sleep. The Sphinx has long been suspected of concealing something beneath. The earliest explorers of the 19th century recorded stories from local villagers about hollow sounds when striking the ground near its chest. Others claimed that camels refused to approach the eastern side after dusk, as if disturbed by a resonance inaudible to human ears. Egyptian priests of the late New Kingdom called the area Sekhet Netja, the field of the gods. When modern engineers first attempted restoration in the 1920s, they too encountered strange cavities. Some were dismissed as erosion channels, others sealed without investigation. A handful of workers claimed to have entered a tunnel running beneath the pores, leading into darkness before collapsing. Officially, none of this happened, but the whispers remained. What if the Sphinx's pores are not merely structural but symbolic, guardians of an entrance, not a monument? In myth, the lion is always the sentinel of thresholds, the guardian of gates, temples, and tombs. Its posture, reclining, alert, eternal, suggests vigilance. Those outstretched pores may not hold the earth but hide a door into the underworld. In 1993, when Robert Schoch and Thomas Debecki's seismic readings detected the cavities, speculation ignited worldwide. Could this be the fabled Hall of Records, the archive of a vanished civilization? Or was it merely an ancient burial chamber forgotten beneath the bedrock? The Egyptian Antiquities Council issued statements denying all such claims, yet their denials grew strangely specific. If there was truly nothing there, why specify what kind of nothing it was? Rumors circulated among the workers on the plateau. Foreign teams had been removed at night, their equipment confiscated, footage had been taken and never seen again. Some claimed that in the early hours of a March morning, a group of researchers had descended into a newly discovered shaft beneath the Sphinx's temple, only to find their way sealed by officials before sunrise. There is no proof, only silence, but silence can sometimes reveal what speech cannot. If one stands before the Sphinx at dawn, when the desert air is cool and the horizon blurs between gold and shadow, one can feel the strangeness of alignment. The Sphinx faces the exact point of sunrise on the spring equinox, when night and day balance in perfect symmetry. Perhaps the builders understood something we have forgotten, that the earth itself moves in rhythm with cycles far older than our civilizations. The monument, the chamber, and the pulse beneath it may not be separate phenomena, but one system, a harmonic mechanism built to resonate with the planet's own frequencies. In ancient Egypt, sound was sacred. Priests used chanting not as worship but as calibration, to tune the mind and matter to the same vibration. Could the Sphinx, with its vast mass of limestone and its buried cavities, have been designed to amplify these resonances? In experiments conducted at nearby temples, researchers found that low-frequency tones produced standing waves, invisible patterns of vibration that altered brain states and induced trance. Perhaps beneath the Sphinx, in the hollow that breathes like an invisible lung, the ancients once summoned the frequencies of creation itself. Modern science dismisses such speculation, yet physics offers strange sympathies. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat, vibrates at roughly 8 cycles per second, a frequency known to influence human brainwaves. Some engineers believe ancient structures were built precisely to harmonize with this field, creating spaces where consciousness could shift, expand, or even commune with something beyond the material. If this is true, then the chamber beneath the Sphinx may not contain objects but experiences, engineered not to preserve information, but to awaken it within those who entered. The Egyptians never separated knowledge from initiation. To know something was to become it. To enter a sacred chamber was to die symbolically, to pass through the gate of silence, and to return transformed. Perhaps those who descended beneath the Sphinx in antiquity did not return at all, not because they perished, but because they were reborn into a dimension of memory we no longer recognize. Even now, in the stillness of night, the Sphinx seems to hum faintly. Sensitive instruments placed near its pores have recorded subsonic vibrations, not caused by wind or tremor, but by the resonance of the rock itself. Could this be the same pulse the ancients once called the voice of the lion? Beneath its stone heart something endures, a quiet, steady rhythm, older than empire, older than kings. It is the tempo of erosion, the cadence of precession, the slow turning of epochs. To listen is to feel time itself breathing beneath your feet. What would happen if we opened that chamber now? Would we find scrolls, relics, or something less tangible? A field of vibration, a silence that erases thought. Perhaps that is why it remains sealed. Perhaps to disturb the pulse beneath the Sphinx is to awaken not knowledge but memory. And memory in the wrong age can be destructive. And so the pores remain folded, the entrance unopened, the pulse undisturbed. For now. One day, the sands will shift again. Instruments will hum, and once more, beneath the lion's gaze, we will hear that slow, rhythmic heartbeat rising through the stone. When that happens, we will have to ask ourselves one question, one that may decide whether we are ready to know what the ancients knew. What if the secret beneath the Sphinx was never buried to be found, but buried to keep the world asleep? The story of the Sphinx does not end in Egypt. Its shadow stretches across oceans, through drowned continents and half-remembered myths, into the oldest dream humanity has ever told, the dream of Atlantis. It is whispered that the Lion of Giza is not merely a monument, but a memory. A surviving piece of a civilization erased by the flood that reshaped the world. To speak of Atlantis is to invite disbelief, yet fragments of its echo persist in almost every ancient tradition. And as the evidence beneath the Sphinx grows stranger, the line between myth and memory grows harder to draw. Plato's dialogue, Timaeus, remains the first record of Atlantis, a civilization of immense knowledge and power that vanished in a single day and night of catastrophe. His source was Egyptian. The priests of Sais, he said, told Solon that this island kingdom once ruled beyond the pillars of Heracles, before its pride summoned destruction. But the priests added something often forgotten, that Egypt itself was the child of survivors. The wisdom of the Nile, they claimed, came from those who fled the sea's rising, who brought with them the knowledge of stars, architecture, and time. If the Sphinx predates the pharaohs, if it was indeed carved in an age of torrential rains, could it be the work of these survivors, the lost architects of Atlantis? The notion is not mere fantasy. Geological records confirm that around 10,000 BCE, at the very end of the Ice Age, the Earth underwent violent upheaval. Melting glaciers raised sea levels by more than 100 meters, drowning entire regions that once stretched along the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. Cores drilled from the ocean floor reveal sudden floods of fresh water and debris, the scars of continents collapsing. To the ancients who watched their world disappear beneath the waves, it must have seemed divine punishment. Yet, perhaps it was only the earth resetting its breath. Among those who survived, memory became myth. In Sumer, the flood became the story of Utnapishtim. In the Bible, it became Noah. In Egypt, it became the Zep Tepi, the first time when the gods walked with men before the deluge. Across the world, the same story repeats. A world destroyed, a few who remember, a promise to rebuild. If the Sphinx belongs to that era, then it is not Egyptian in origin, but Atlantean in inheritance. Its builders, displaced and scattered, may have sought to preserve their memory not in words but in alignment, with stars that do not drown. Stone endures when language dies. The connection grows stronger the deeper one looks. Both Egyptian and Platonic accounts describe a sacred geometry governing the cosmos, a harmony between heaven and earth, expressed through number, proportion, and vibration. This is the Atlantean Code, the belief that reality itself is structured by resonance, and that by aligning structures to these cosmic frequencies, one could bridge the gap between the material and the divine. Every element of the Giza Plateau reflects this principle. The Sphinx faces the east, aligned with Leo, the celestial lion. The Great Pyramid's angle encodes P and F, the constants of creation. The distances between the monuments mirror the ratios of orbital periods. The entire complex forms a harmonic grid, as if designed not for worship but for synchronization, a machine for remembering. Modern science, reluctantly, has begun to rediscover what the ancients already knew. Quantum physicists speak of vibrations, of matter, as patterns of frequency, of energy woven through all things. To the builders of Atlantis, such truths were not equations but rituals. They sang them into stone. The Sphinx, carved from a single mass of bedrock, is a symphonic monument, each contour designed to vibrate with the Earth's natural frequencies. Its buried chambers, if they exist, might have amplified sound or consciousness, serving as a resonance chamber between worlds. It is said that the Atlanteans possessed no written language in the way we understand it. Their script was the geometry of form itself, the curve of an arc, the angle of a shadow, the harmony between structure and star. Perhaps beneath the Sphinx in that forbidden chamber lies not scrolls or relics, but patterns, carvings or markings whose meaning is vibrational, not verbal. A code not meant to be read, but to be felt. When researchers like Edgar Cayce spoke of a hall of records, they described it as a place where the vibrations of knowledge were preserved. He insisted it would be found beneath the right pore of the Sphinx, sealed until humanity's consciousness was ready to understand it. His words were dismissed as mysticism, yet his prediction of hidden chambers proved strangely accurate. What if the records were not texts at all, but energy imprints, the memory of a lost frequency encoded within the stone itself? Imagine a civilization whose science was inseparable from spirit, whose understanding of physics, geometry, and consciousness were one. To such a people, the Sphinx would not be art nor temple but interface, a node between the visible and invisible, the human and the eternal. Perhaps it was designed to endure until the cycle turned again, until a future humanity, us, rediscovered the rhythm of the cosmos. In this light, the Sphinx becomes more than ancient architecture. It is a survivor's message, written in the only language that could survive catastrophe: proportion, alignment, vibration. The Atlantean Code is not mythology. It is mathematics rendered sacred. Skeptics argue that Atlantis was Plato's moral allegory, not history. Yet why would the priests of Sais invent a flood that geology later confirms? Why would multiple cultures, oceans apart, remember the same event? Memory cannot be fabricated across continents unless it once was shared. Even now, hints of that forgotten science emerge in anomalies we cannot explain. Acoustic tests reveal that the Sphinx resonates at specific frequencies, the same frequencies that induce altered states of consciousness in human listeners. The geometry of the pyramids aligns not just with stars, but with harmonic intervals of the Earth's electromagnetic field. These are not coincidences. They are remnants of an understanding so advanced that it appears mystical, only because we have forgotten how to measure it. Perhaps the Atlantean Code is not lost, only dormant, like a melody remembered by the planet itself. and the Sphinx resting in its timeless pose may be the tuning fork of that memory. Beneath its pores, the pulse of time beats in harmonic measure with the stars. If Atlantis fell, it did not vanish entirely. It sank beneath history, not water. Its ruins may lie not under the sea, but beneath our own amnesia, under the sands, under the stories we tell to keep mystery at bay. So the lion waits, gazing eternally toward the east, as if expecting something, or someone, to return. Each dawn repeats the same silent gesture. The sun rises, and the Sphinx remembers. Maybe that is what Plato meant when he wrote that knowledge is recollection. Maybe the Sphinx was carved not to preserve the past, but to awaken the future. And when the day comes that we finally decode its proportions, when we understand that the same harmony-shaping stars also shapes thought, perhaps the pulse beneath the Sphinx will quicken again. And then we will face the question that haunts every legend of Atlantis, not where it was, but why it fell. Geometry was once a sacred language, not a science of measurement, but a map of creation itself. Before numbers were used to count, they were used to describe the divine. To the ancients, a circle was not a shape, it was eternity. A triangle was the trinity of forces: birth, decay, and rebirth. And a square, the foundation, the earth beneath heaven's arc. Beneath the Sphinx, this geometry is not merely present, it is alive. The monument breathes proportion, as though every line of its body obeys a code inscribed into the cosmos itself. The Great Sphinx, the pyramids, and the Nile. Together they form a geometry so precise it defies accident. Draw a line from the Sphinx through the center of the Great Pyramid and extend it westward, and it aligns perfectly with the setting sun on the equinox. Measure the spacing between the pyramids, and you find the golden ratio 1:1.618 repeated again and again. The very angle of the Great Pyramid, 51 degrees 51 minutes, encodes the number pi, a circle folded into a square. The Sphinx faces true east within a fraction of a degree, as though carved by eyes that saw the curvature of the Earth long before satellites could confirm it. How could such accuracy exist 5,000 to perhaps 10,000 years ago? The question is not simply architectural, it is metaphysical. Geometry, for the ancients, was a way of perceiving the mind of creation. The Egyptians called this cosmic order Mat, truth, balance, harmony. To live in accordance with Mart was to align oneself with the rhythm of the universe. The Sphinx and the pyramids are not only monuments, but embodiments of that law. They stand where the energy of earth and sky converge, where geometry becomes prayer. The French mathematician R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch, who spent 15 years studying the Temple of Luxor, argued that ancient Egyptian structures were built according to a system of sacred proportion based on the human body, a reflection of the belief that man and cosmos mirror each other. The body, the temple, and the universe were the same organism expressed on different scales. In this view, the Sphinx is not merely a sculpture of a lion with a human face, but the synthesis of both, the union of instinct and intellect, of the animal and the divine. Even the dimensions of the Sphinx whisper hidden ratios. Its total length of 73 meters divided by its height of 20 meters yields approximately 3.65, a close echo of the solar year in days. Its orientation toward the rising sun links it to cycles of precession, the slow 26,000-year wobble of Earth's axis. Every dawn it gazes upon the horizon it marked millennia ago, as though time itself were a compass slowly turning back to its origin. In the 1960s, a team of Soviet researchers suggested that the Sphinx, the Great Pyramid, and the temples of Giza form a triadic harmonic structure, a design meant to resonate with frequencies of the planet's magnetic field. They noted that the spacing of these monuments corresponds to nodal points where Earth's resonance amplifies naturally, though dismissed by Western archaeologists as pseudoscience. Later acoustic studies found that sound waves do indeed behave unusually within the plateau, producing standing vibrations at frequencies that correlate with Schumann resonance, the Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat. What if the architects were not building monuments, but instruments? The concept is almost unthinkable through the lens of modern architecture, yet increasingly plausible. Structures throughout Egypt exhibit acoustic effects, from the Serapeum of Saqqara, where deep tones seem to reverberate endlessly, to the Temple of Karnak, where specific chambers resonate at frequencies known to induce trance. Perhaps the Sphinx was part of the same symphonic design, a resonator carved from the Earth itself, tuned to the song of the planet. Beneath its pores, seismic readings suggest cavities that could act as harmonic chambers, amplifying sound waves in the same way a violin's hollow body amplifies its strings. When priests chanted at dawn, their voices might have entered resonance with the stone, producing a physical vibration strong enough to alter consciousness. Ancient texts speak of the raising of the Sekhem, the vital energy that connects man to the gods. To raise it was to awaken remembrance. The hidden geometry of Giza, then, is not only spatial but spiritual. Each line, each ratio, each alignment is part of a greater pattern, a geometry of remembrance. To stand before the Sphinx is to stand inside a coordinate system of meaning, one that points not outward to stars alone but inward to the architecture of the soul. The concept of as above, so below, central to Hermeticism, may have originated here. The Sphinx and the pyramids reflect the constellations above, not merely for symbolic beauty but for synchronization. The ancient builders seem to believe that by mirroring the heavens, they could maintain balance between cosmic and earthly forces. In a universe alive with resonance, geometry becomes a form of communication. In modern terms, we might call it data, information stored in the harmony of form. The Sphinx, in this sense, is not only an image carved in stone, but an equation encoded in proportion. Its measurements, its position, even its erosional scars all describe variable of time, climate, and celestial motion. It is both monument and message. Could the lost hall of records beneath it contain similar geometric inscriptions, the blueprint of an older science that saw no boundary between physics and metaphysics? If such a chamber exists, it may hold not books or scrolls, but diagrams, spirals, ratios, harmonic series, drawn into the rock itself. To decipher them would require not only mathematics, but consciousness attuned to their frequency. Some researchers have noted that the Giza monuments correspond to nodes in what ancient geomancers later called ley lines, pathways of telluric energy running through the earth. These lines intersect at major sacred sites worldwide, from Stonehenge to Angkor. Whether coincidence or design, they suggest a global network of geometry, a planetary map of resonance. If this is true, the Sphinx may stand not alone, but as part of a greater architecture spanning continents, a relic of an age when humanity understood the earth as a living instrument. We call such ideas mystical. But perhaps the mysticism lies only in our loss of language. Geometry, once divine, became mundane. Number, once sacred, became mere utility. Yet in the silent intervals between equations, the old meaning remains. At night, when the desert cools and the stars pulse above Giza, the air around the Sphinx feels charged, as if the monument still remembers its tuning. To those who listen with patience, the geometry becomes audible, not as sound, but as awareness, a slow rhythm between heartbeats. Maybe that is the real secret, that the geometry of the Sphinx was never meant to be understood but felt. For understanding divides, while feeling unites, and so the Sphinx continues to gaze eastward, marking the passage of stars across ages, keeping the harmony intact. Beneath it, the hidden geometry sleeps, its pattern incomplete, waiting for minds calm enough and hearts precise enough to read it once more. When that day comes, perhaps the earth itself will exhale, and the lines of stone will sing again. History has a strange habit of hiding its deepest truths behind the veils of sanctity. Temples become churches, gods become saints, and knowledge becomes dogma. What survives is not always what was meant to be remembered, but what was permitted to remain. In the case of Egypt and of the Sphinx, some believe the greatest veil of all was woven not by time or sand, but by theology. For if the lion at Giza guards the memory of a civilization before the flood, then its secret challenges not only archaeology, but the very chronology of the world preserved by faith. The Vatican, that solemn custodian of Christian history, sits upon archives said to stretch for miles beneath Rome. Corridors filled with manuscripts, forbidden texts, and letters that have not seen daylight for centuries. There, among dusty codices, scholars have whispered of documents connecting early church scholars to Egypt's priestly law. In the Renaissance, when Europe rediscovered the wisdom of antiquity, the Church absorbed Egypt's mysteries through the filter of Hermeticism. The writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, said to be the Egyptian god Thoth in human form. In those Hermetic texts, the phrase "as above, so below" appears as a sacred law, a reflection of the geometry encoded in the Sphinx itself. The Hermetica speaks of the earth as the mirror of heaven, and of the temple within the man. Such ideas were dangerous, for they suggested that divinity could be reached through knowledge rather than obedience. To reveal that the ancients had already mapped the structure of creation, long before the Bible's first line, would have shattered the hierarchy upon which the Church's authority stood. And so, as some researchers have argued, the oldest Egyptian wisdom was not destroyed, but domesticated, reinterpreted, diluted, renamed. The gods of Egypt were recast as symbols, their cosmic architecture transmuted into allegory. The Sphinx, once a cosmic sentinel, became a pagan idol. The geometry of spirit was reduced to metaphor. What could not be absorbed was suppressed. It is said that the Vatican's own astronomers, in the 17th century, secretly studied the star alignments of Giza, attempting to reconcile the Egyptian sky with biblical chronology. They found anomalies, constellations that implied epochs far older than Genesis allowed. One Jesuit scholar, Athanasius Kircher, published elaborate maps of the ancient world, hinting that Egypt was the cradle not of idolatry, but of a primordial revelation, a truth given to humanity before history began. His works were quietly buried after his death. The Church would continue to guard the heavens, but never the stars of Egypt. Perhaps this tension explains why access to Egypt's deeper mysteries remains restricted even today. The same impulse that locked away the Gnostic Gospels and the pagan codices also silences the chambers beneath the Sphinx. The guardians have changed uniforms, but their purpose endures: to preserve order, not truth. When the first European explorers arrived in Egypt during the 19th century, many were Jesuits or scholars trained in theological institutions. They came with both curiosity and caution, seeking to confirm that Egypt's monuments fit within biblical timelines. But what they found instead was disobedience. Stones that spoke of tens of thousands of years, gods older than Eden, a civilization that seemed to remember the stars themselves. The more they dug, the older Egypt became, and the older Egypt became, the younger Scripture looked. The question became political as much as spiritual. Could a civilization predating the flood have existed, advanced and godlike, before the world the Bible described? Could the Sphinx have watched over humanity's rise not once, but several times, through cycles of creation and destruction? The Church never answered publicly, but behind closed doors, the implications were grave. If knowledge preceded revelation, then revelation was no longer unique. If man had already walked with gods before Christ, then the foundation of divine chronology fractured. In that fracture lies the silence of modern archaeology. Egypt's antiquities are now guarded with near religious fervor. Permissions to excavate beneath sacred sites are denied not only by Egyptian authorities, but quietly by global agreements between academic and religious institutions. Certain areas of the Giza Plateau are off-limits, designated zones of cultural preservation. Yet preservation often means containment. To imagine a connection between the Vatican and Giza may sound conspiratorial, yet history itself forges the link. The early church fathers, Clement, Origen, Augustine, all studied in Alexandria, the city where Egyptian, Greek, and Jewish knowledge once converged. It was here that scrolls of astronomy, mathematics, and mysticism were copied and translated into Latin. When the Library of Alexandria burned, its fragments were not lost entirely. They were carried westward, into the monasteries and scriptoria of Rome. What survived became the hidden spine of European theology, a secret Egypt running beneath the corridors of Christendom. Some claim that among the Vatican's restricted archives lies a translation of the Book of Thoth, the mythical Egyptian text said to contain the secrets of the gods. In legend, the book could grant dominion over heaven and earth to any who understood its symbols. If such a text exists, it would bridge Hermetic philosophy and the geometry of the Sphinx, the knowledge of form as divine language. Yet if discovered, it would dismantle the Church's monopoly on revelation. Perhaps that is why it remains buried, both literally and ideologically. The parallels between the Sphinx and the Vatican are uncanny. Both guard something ancient beneath their foundations. Both maintain an aura of holiness built on silence. Both have survived countless empires while refusing to yield their deepest secrets. One is carved from stone, the other from faith, but each watches humanity through the long corridors of time, protecting truths we may not yet be ready to face. Imagine the day when a fragment of papyrus emerges from the archives, describing the Lion of Giza as the guardian of the first light, built before the Great Flood by those who knew the measure of the stars. Imagine the tremor that would pass through the world's religions, the sudden vertigo of realizing that the story of Genesis is only the latest chapter in a cycle far older. Perhaps that is why the sands remain undisturbed. Perhaps somewhere in a dim corridor beneath Rome, there is already knowledge of what lies beneath the Sphinx, and an unspoken agreement to keep it there. For to reveal that humanity has lived, died, and lived again under the same stars would make all doctrines fragile. And fragile doctrines cannot rule the living. At night, when the bells of Rome echo across the Tiber, and the desert winds sweep through Giza, it almost feels as if two ancient sentinels, the lion and the basilica, listen to each other through time. Both stand upon vaults of forgotten knowledge. Both hold keys to the same riddle. Why does power always fear memory? Maybe the Sphinx and the Vatican are not enemies but twins. Two halves of a covenant forged after the flood, when the world vowed that knowledge would never again be allowed to destroy itself. And if that covenant still holds, then the chamber beneath the Sphinx will remain sealed until humanity learns not only how to uncover, but how to understand. For now, the lion sleeps, and the archives stay locked, and between them, the truth waits, neither holy nor profane, only forgotten. When you stand before the Sphinx at dawn, before the crowds and the noise, you can almost hear it, a resonance that isn't quite sound, a vibration you feel rather than hear. It seeps through the soles of your feet and rises through the spine, a low and steady hum like the breathing of the earth. To most, it is imagination. To others, it is the echo of an ancient science now forgotten. The music of stone. Long before we learned to measure sound with hertz and frequencies, the ancients treated vibration as the language of creation. In Egypt, words were power, and sound was the instrument through which form was made manifest. To speak a thing was to bring it into being. This principle, known as Hika, lay at the heart of their cosmology. The universe, they said, was sung into existence. Every temple, every statue, every monument carried the memory of that first vibration, the original tone of creation. And of all the remnants that survived the ages, None sings louder in silence than the Sphinx. Acoustic researchers who have studied the Giza Plateau describe strange phenomena. Certain tones, when produced near the Sphinx, are amplified by the rock itself. Low frequencies resonate through the limestone, producing standing waves that seem to linger in the air long after the sound has stopped. The phenomenon is so subtle that microphones barely detect it, yet human perception senses it unmistakably. A vibration that reaches inward, that alters mood and awareness. It may sound mystical, but the science of resonance proves that all matter vibrates. Every object has a natural frequency, a tone at which it hums. When two bodies share resonance, they transfer energy effortlessly, as if recognizing one another. The ancients, it seems, knew this intuitively. They built according to harmony, not just symmetry. In that sense, the Sphinx may be less a statue and more a tuning device, a monumental instrument designed to harmonize with the frequencies of the Earth itself. In 2018, a team of acoustic engineers from Cairo University conducted tests on the Sphinx's enclosure. Using low-frequency pulses, they recorded echo patterns that behaved as though the monument were hollow. Certain notes caused the ground to vibrate more intensely, as if sound waves were being absorbed and redirected beneath the structure. The effect was localized, a resonance trapped under the pores and chest, precisely where ancient legends placed the hidden chamber. The engineers released only a brief statement before their work was discontinued without explanation. Sound, after all, can reveal what sight cannot. Seismic imaging itself is merely sound turned into data, echoes drawn into pictures. The same method that found cavities beneath the Sphinx in the 1990s relies on vibration. When a tone returns differently than expected, it means something lies beneath. And in every survey since, that difference has remained. But the resonance of the Sphinx may not be only physical. Ancient Egyptian rituals were performed at dawn and dusk, the hours when light and darkness balance. The same hours when the monument's acoustic field seems most responsive. Priests chanted hymns in tones that aligned with the natural harmonics of the limestone. The chants were not words of worship but calibrations, sonic keys meant to attune consciousness to the monument's frequency. Within this practice lay the belief that sound could open gates between worlds, between the visible and the invisible, the mortal and the divine. Across the ancient world, similar practices echo this idea. In Tibetan monasteries, monks chant in overtones that produce multiple pitches simultaneously, replicating natural resonances found in caves. The Hebrew shofar, the conch shells of the Pacific, the drums of Africa, all preserve fragments of the same forgotten understanding. That vibration, properly tuned, can alter the boundary between matter and spirit. The Sphinx, carved directly from bedrock, might once have been the Earth's greatest resonator, the point where sound, geometry, and consciousness converged. Imagine the ceremony as it might have been. Priests standing between the pores, the chants rising with the sun, the tones spiraling into the sky, bouncing back from the walls of the enclosure until the very air thickened with sound. The vibrations would have entered the stone, waking the monument from its stillness, until both singers and sculpture vibrated as one body. Perhaps this was the secret of initiation, to feel the song of the Sphinx not as an observer, but as part of its resonance. Modern researchers might call it acoustics. The ancients called it transformation. If such a ritual took place, it might explain why Thutmose IV claimed the Sphinx spoke to him. In his dream stela, he wrote that while resting in its shadow, the great lion's voice called out, promising him kingship if he would clear the sand from his body. The story is treated as myth. But what if the experience was acoustic, not supernatural? The sound of wind passing through buried cavities could produce vibrations that the dreaming mind translates as words. To a consciousness attuned by ritual, such resonance might have seemed like the voice of the gods themselves. There are stories, unconfirmed but persistent, of engineers who claim to have recreated those lost frequencies. They speak of tones so low, they can be felt in the chest. Tones that cause sand to move, water to ripple, and even objects to levitate slightly when resonance peaks. Experiments with sound levitation have proven that acoustic pressure can counteract gravity in controlled spaces. The ancients may have used similar principles on an unimaginable scale, not only for ritual but for construction. The possibility that sound, not brute labor, was the key to raising stone has haunted archaeology for decades. In that light, the Sphinx becomes more than a guardian. It becomes a memory of how sound once shaped the world. Perhaps it stands not to watch over the pyramids, but to remember the tone that built them. Its silence is not emptiness but containment, a deep, inaudible chord still vibrating beneath the sands. And if there is indeed a chamber beneath it, perhaps it was designed not to hold relics, but to resonate. The hall of records may be less an archive of words than a room of sound, a space where certain frequencies awaken images or memories within those who enter. Edgar Cayce's prediction that the records will speak when mankind is ready could be literal. The chamber might indeed speak, not through language, but through vibration. In quantum physics, there is a concept known as the observer effect, the idea that observation itself changes reality. Perhaps sound, as the first movement of observation, was the ancients' way of shaping reality consciously. To chant was to collapse potential into form. To sing in harmony with the earth was to create balance. Today, the Sphinx stands mute. Its song has been silenced by erosion, pollution, and the ceaseless hum of the modern world. But the stone remembers. Every groove, every hollow, every scar holds a frequency waiting to be heard again. And one night, perhaps when the air is perfectly still, the desert might awaken with a sound older than civilization. A tone that moves not through ears but through the bones, reminding us that silence was never empty and that the world itself was once a song. When that day comes, the Sphinx will not roar. It will hum softly, endlessly, and the earth will remember the melody it once knew. Beneath the golden dust of Giza, beneath the foundations of temples and tombs, there are rivers that no map shows. Ancient channels that have not seen the sky in 10,000 years. They run silent and cold, sealed by time and sand, yet their traces remain in the memory of the land itself. The desert was not always a desert. Once the Nile split into many veins, feeding a lush plain of green. Water shaped Egypt, but perhaps it also shaped its mysteries. And some say that beneath the Sphinx, that most silent of guardians, the lost echo of that ancient water still flows. In 1996, geophysical surveys of the Giza Plateau revealed something strange. Beneath the limestone bedrock were signs of underground fissures and cavities, not random, but patterned, following lines that curved toward the Nile. Some anomalies produced reflections consistent with water-filled chambers sealed under sediment. Officially, they were ignored, yet local workers, who have lived on the plateau for generations, speak of wells that never run dry. They call them the veins of Osiris. When the wind is still, they say, you can hear the faint murmur of running water below the Sphinx's pores, like the heartbeat of the earth. To the Egyptians, water was never just water. It was none, the primordial ocean from which creation arose. Every temple was a symbolic island floating upon it. Every god was born from its depths. The Sphinx itself, carved from limestone deposited by that same ancient sea, could be seen as a crystallized wave of none, solidified to guard the frontier between chaos and form. Perhaps the river beneath it is not only geological but symbolic, a reminder that beneath all creation lies the endless, unknowable sea. Yet some scientists have begun to wonder whether the symbolism hides a truth. The French hydrologist Dr. Alain Gachet once noted that ancient monuments were often built above underground water systems, not by accident, but intention. Water, when confined under pressure, generates a subtle electromagnetic field. Structures placed above such fields can exhibit acoustic and energetic anomalies. Perhaps the builders of Giza knew this, choosing their sites not for beauty but for resonance. The Sphinx, sitting above one of the plateau's deepest geological faults, may occupy a point where the Earth's hidden energies converge. In 2010, satellite imaging confirmed the presence of buried riverbeds, extending west from the Nile toward Giza. These ancient channels date back to the early Holocene. Around the same time, Robert Schoch's geological evidence places the Sphinx's creation, an epoch when heavy rains carved valleys that later became buried under sand. The Sphinx's enclosure itself bears marks of water erosion, its walls rounded as though shaped by flood. Could the monument have once stood at the edge of a lake, a mirror of the sky where the lion gazed upon its reflection each dawn? If so, the Sphinx was not merely a sentinel of stone, but a watcher of tides, both celestial and earthly. Its gaze toward the rising sun may have also marked the seasonal flood of the Nile, the return of life to a parched land. In Egyptian myth, the god Hapi controlled the inundation, and his arrival each year symbolized rebirth. A priest might have seen in the Sphinx not only the guardian of knowledge, but the mediator of cycles between drought and flood, death and resurrection. There are stories, scattered like shards across history, that speak of secret chambers connected to subterranean waterways beneath Giza. In the texts of the Ptolemaic period, the Book of the Hidden Chamber describes a water road leading to the resting place of Osiris, the god of resurrection, beneath the Hill of the Lion. In 1999, explorers discovered the Osiris Shaft, a multi-level chamber deep beneath the Giza Plateau, accessible only by a narrow tunnel and a submerged passage. The lowest level contains a stone sarcophagus surrounded by water, resting silently in the dark. It is one of the strangest finds in modern Egyptology, an underground lake beneath the pyramids where death meets reflection. Official reports labeled it a symbolic tomb. Yet one cannot help but notice how it echoes the myth of Osiris himself, whose dismembered body was cast into the Nile to be reassembled by Isis in the waters of rebirth. Perhaps the entire plateau is a map of that myth, the Sphinx marking the entrance, the pyramids marking the resurrection. And if there truly is a river beneath the lion, then it is not a coincidence, but a continuation of the same ancient design, the flow of life beneath the stillness of death. Water carries memory. Science tells us that molecules of water can store vibrational patterns, that sound and frequency can alter its crystalline structure. The ancients may not have spoken in such terms, but they understood intuitively that water listens. To them, it was the perfect medium for preserving the song of creation. Perhaps the hidden river beneath the Sphinx is more than geological. Perhaps it's a living archive, a fluid record of the Earth's past. If vibrations from the stone above continue to echo into its depths, then every sound, every chant, every whisper uttered by priests across millennia might still linger in its molecular memory. Imagine descending into that darkness, the air thick with damp limestone, the smell of age and silence. The light of your torch catches ripples on black water, each one reflecting the face of the lion above, fractured and shifting. You hear it then, not with your ears but within, a low, endless murmur, like a whisper from time itself. Is it the water moving, or is it the memory of all that once was? In ancient ritual texts, the journey through the underworld was often described as a voyage by boat through subterranean waters. The soul of the initiate, guided by chants, crossed the river of renewal to reach the fields of eternity. The Sphinx may have been both gate and ferryman, its silent body marking the passage between the living and the immortal. Perhaps those who entered its chamber beneath the poles stepped not into a tomb, but into reflection, a mirrored world where water held the memory of light. Modern excavation will likely never reach such depths. The groundwater beneath Giza lies treacherously close to the limestone's breaking point, and authorities forbid further digging, But nature has a way of remembering on our behalf. Ground-penetrating radar still detects anomalies, dense in some areas, fluid in others, hinting that the hidden river is not myth, but map. If one day it is uncovered, we may find no treasure, no inscriptions, only silence and water, a mirror that reflects what we bring into it. But perhaps that is the truest secret of the Sphinx, that it does not guard knowledge, but reflection. That beneath all civilization, beneath all certainty, the river still runs, carrying not answers, but echoes. And if you listen closely, you might hear it now. That faint sound beneath the sand, between the pulses of the earth. It is the same murmur that carried the world through floods and flames, sang beneath Atlantis and Giza alike. The river that remembers. It has been flowing since before history began, and it will flow long after the last stone has crumbled. Silence is older than the sand. It moves beneath words, beneath monuments, beneath all the stories we tell ourselves about truth. In Egypt, silence was never the absence of sound. It was the guardian of power. The ancients called it sashita, the discipline of concealment. What is hidden, they believed, remains alive. What is spoken begins to decay. And so, like their gods, the secrets of Egypt survived by staying unspoken. The Sphinx has mastered that art longer than any other being on Earth. Every age has tried to make it speak. Napoleon scholars measured it, priests blessed it, archaeologists prodded it with machines, and yet it remains mute. Perhaps that is because silence is its language, and every attempt to force it to reveal its story only deepens its secrecy. It is not the stone that refuses, it is the system that surrounds it. By the late 20th century, the politics of Egyptology had become a fortress more impenetrable than the pyramids themselves. To excavate, to publish, even to question the official timeline requires permission, and permission means allegiance. Those who stray too far from orthodoxy find doors quietly closing, grants withdrawn, access revoked. Robert Schoch, who dared to suggest that the Sphinx might predate the pharaohs, found his research dismissed and his permits denied. The same pattern repeats again and again, silence enforced not by sand but by bureaucracy. It would be comforting to think this suppression stems from pride or nationalism, the desire to protect Egypt's legacy from sensationalism. But the pattern suggests something deeper, more deliberate. For every discovery that threatens the accepted chronology, a veil descends. Seismic readings are sealed, excavation reports vanish, archives are misplaced. Even within Egypt's own Supreme Council of Antiquities, researchers whisper of files they are not allowed to see, images never published, and results altered before release. Some trace the origin of this silence to 1978, when a restricted document known as the Giza Master Plan was circulated among a small group of archaeologists and engineers. It outlined future excavations across the plateau, identifying zones of extreme sensitivity. One of those zones lay directly beneath the Sphinx. The document advised indefinite postponement of any drilling there, citing structural and theological implications. Structural, understandable, but theological. What faith trembles before a cavity of stone? To understand this, we must recall that archaeology in Egypt has never been purely scientific. It is a state enterprise bound to politics and belief. Every new discovery rewrites identity, and identity sustains power. The Sphinx, as the symbol of Egypt's eternity, cannot afford to contradict the timeline upon which modern Egypt and much of human history has been built. To admit it predates recorded civilization would unravel the narrative that humanity began only 5,000 years ago. It would mean that history is not a ladder, but a spiral, repeating itself through cataclysm and forgetting. Perhaps that realization is the true danger, not what lies beneath, but what it implies above. In the early 1990s, whispers began to spread among foreign researchers. Unauthorized night excavations were said to have occurred near the Sphinx's right paw, small teams working quietly, drilling under the guise of restoration. A few photographs leaked, showing a rectangular opening half buried in sand. It was sealed the following week. When questioned, the Antiquities Council denied any such work had taken place. Yet eyewitnesses insisted otherwise. One described hearing a deep hum from below the monument, like air moving through a newly opened void. The site was then closed indefinitely. Perhaps the hum was only wind or imagination, but perhaps it was the breath of a secret exposed briefly to light, only to be buried again. It is not unprecedented. The same pattern can be found elsewhere in history. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, their translation was delayed for decades by the small committee that controlled access. When the Nag Hammadi texts were found in Egypt in 1945, half of them disappeared into private collections. Knowledge has always been filtered, curated, managed, not for preservation, but for control. The Sphinx is simply the oldest gatekeeper of that tradition. Some believe that silence itself is the final seal, that beneath the Sphinx lies not a chamber filled with relics, but an emptiness so profound that to reveal it would destroy illusion, a void that would prove humanity's amnesia beyond doubt. For centuries we have been told that civilization began with writing, but perhaps it began with remembering, and what we call progress is only a long forgetting. Imagine for a moment that the chamber does exist, that the seal of silence were broken, and explorers descended into the darkness. They find no gold, no sarcophagus, only walls covered in smooth stone, as if polished by water or sound. They touch the walls, and vibrations pass through their skin, frequencies too low to hear but strong enough to feel. The walls hum faintly, like the deep note of an organ. Then, as light flickers across the chamber, images appear not carved but reflected, shifting patterns of geometry and light, like holograms responding to thought. They realize then that they are not in a tomb but in a machine, one designed to awaken memory itself. Such a vision belongs to speculation, yet the fear it evokes is real. What would happen if humanity suddenly remembered? If we saw our past not as a line but as a cycle, with every rise matched by a fall, every age of light followed by a flood of forgetting? Our religions would tremble, our empires lose purpose, our arrogance collapse. Perhaps silence is not suppression but mercy. Still, silence breeds curiosity. Each generation digs a little deeper, both in sand and in mind. The seal may hold, but pressure builds beneath it, the pressure of questions, and every question is a crack in the stone. In 2021, another rumor spread that infrared scans of the plateau had revealed heat signatures beneath the Sphinx's body, indicating voids of uniform temperature surrounded by cooler rock. The findings were briefly mentioned in a French technical paper, then vanished from circulation. The official explanation was instrumental error, but to those who have followed the pattern, it was another verse in the same song. The silence again remained intact. Perhaps the seal is not meant to be broken by force. Perhaps it requires resonance, the right frequency of understanding, not curiosity. The priests of old believed that the Sphinx guarded not a secret, but a threshold. Those who approached without harmony would find only silence. Those who approached with reverence might hear the stone itself respond. If that is true, then every scientist, every mystic, every wanderer who's ever stood before the Sphinx has already been part of the test. And perhaps that is why it still stands. Because humanity continues to ask, and because the question itself is the offering. So the seal of silence endures, not carved in stone, but woven in thought. Each denial, each censorship, each forgotten report is another layer of protection. Beneath it, the truth sleeps. Above it, the world pretends to forget. But the Sphinx remembers. It always remembers. and somewhere beneath its pores the silence waits, not for permission, but for resonance. One day, when the right question is asked in the right tone, the stone may answer, and when it does, the sound will not be loud. It will be a whisper, quiet enough to shake the world. Silence is older than the sand. It moves beneath words, beneath monuments, beneath all the stories we tell ourselves about truth. In Egypt, silence was never the absence of sound. It was the guardian of power. The ancients called it sasheta, the discipline of concealment. What is hidden, they believed, remains alive. What is spoken begins to decay. And so, like their gods, the secrets of Egypt survived by staying unspoken. The Sphinx has mastered that art longer than any other being on Earth. Every age has tried to make it speak. Napoleon's scholars measured it, priests blessed it, archaeologists prodded it with machines, and yet it remains mute. Perhaps that is because silence is its language, and every attempt to force it to reveal its story only deepens its secrecy. It is not the stone that refuses, it is the system that surrounds it. By the late 20th century, the politics of Egyptology had become a fortress more impenetrable than the pyramids themselves. To excavate, to publish, even to question the official timeline requires permission, and permission means allegiance. Those who stray too far from orthodoxy find doors quietly closing, grants withdrawn, access revoked. Robert Schoch, who dared to suggest that the Sphinx might predate the pharaohs, found his research dismissed and his permits denied. The same pattern that repeats again and again, silence enforced not by sand, but by bureaucracy. It would be comforting to think this suppression stems from pride or nationalism, the desire to protect Egypt's legacy from sensationalism. But the pattern suggests something deeper, more deliberate. For every discovery that threatens the accepted chronology, a veil descends. Seismic readings are sealed, excavation reports vanish, archives are misplaced. Even within Egypt's own Supreme Council of Antiquities, researchers whisper of files they are not allowed to see, images never published and results altered before release. Some trace the origin of this silence to 1978, when a restricted document known as the Giza Master Plan was circulated among a small group of archaeologists and engineers. It outlined future excavations across the plateau, identifying zones of extreme sensitivity. One of those zones lay directly beneath the Sphinx. The document advised indefinite postponement of any drilling there, citing structural and theological implications. Structural, understandable. But theological? What faith trembles before a cavity of stone? To understand this, we must recall that archaeology in Egypt has never been purely scientific. It is a state enterprise bound to politics and belief. Every new discovery rewrites identity, and identity sustains power. The Sphinx, as the symbol of Egypt's eternity, cannot afford to contradict the timeline upon which modern Egypt, and much of human history, has been built. To admit it predates recorded civilization would unravel the narrative that humanity began only 5,000 years ago. It would mean that history is not the ladder, but a spiral, repeating itself through cataclysm and forgetting. Perhaps that realization is the true danger, not what lies beneath, but what it implies above. In the early 1990s, whispers began to spread among foreign researchers. Unauthorized night excavations were said to have occurred near the Sphinx's right pore. Small teams working quietly, drilling under the guise of restoration. A few photographs leaked, showing a rectangular opening half buried in sand. It was sealed the following week. When questioned, the Antiquities Council denied any such work had taken place, yet eyewitnesses insisted otherwise. One described hearing a deep hum from below the monument, like air moving through a newly opened void. The site was then closed indefinitely. Perhaps the hum was only wind or imagination. But perhaps it was the breath of a secret exposed briefly to light, only to be buried again. It is not unprecedented. The same pattern can be found elsewhere in history. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, the translation was delayed for decades by the small committee that controlled access. When the Nag Hammadi texts were found in Egypt in 1945, half of them disappeared into private collections. Knowledge has always been filtered, curated, managed, not for preservation, but for control. The Sphinx is simply the oldest gatekeeper of that tradition. Some believe that silence itself is the final seal, that beneath the Sphinx lies not a chamber filled with relics, but an emptiness so profound that to reveal it would destroy illusion, a void that would prove humanity's amnesia beyond doubt. For centuries, we have been told that civilization began with writing, but perhaps it began with remembering, and what we call progress is only a long forgetting. Imagine for a moment that the chamber does exist, that the seal of silence were broken, and explorers descended into the darkness. They find no gold, no sarcophagus, only walls covered in smooth stone, as if polished by water or sound. They touch the walls, and vibrations pass through their skin, frequencies too low to hear but strong enough to feel. The walls hum faintly, like the deep note of an organ. Then, as light flickers across the chamber, images appear not carved but reflected, shifting patterns of geometry and light, like holograms responding to thought. They realize then that they are not in a tomb but in a machine, one designed to awaken memory itself. Such a vision belongs to speculation, yet the fear it evokes is real. What would happen if humanity suddenly remembered? If we saw our past not as a line but as a cycle, with every rise matched by a fall, every age of light followed by a flood of forgetting? Our religions would tremble, our empires lose purpose, our arrogance collapse. Perhaps silence is not suppression but mercy. Still, silence breeds curiosity. Each generation digs a little deeper, both in sand and in mind. The seal may hold, but pressure builds beneath it, the pressure of questions, and every question is a crack in the stone. In 2021, another rumor spread out that infrared scans of the plateau had revealed heat signatures beneath the Sphinx's body, indicating voids of uniform temperature surrounded by cooler rock. The findings were briefly mentioned in a French technical paper, then vanished from circulation. The official explanation was instrumental error. But to those who have followed the pattern, it was another verse in the same song. The silence again remained intact. Perhaps the seal is not meant to be broken by force. Perhaps it requires resonance, the right frequency of understanding, not curiosity. The priests of old believed that the Sphinx guarded not a secret, but a threshold. Those who approached without harmony would find only silence. Those who approached with reverence might hear the stone itself respond. If that is true, then every scientist, every mystic, every wanderer who has ever stood before the Sphinx has already been part of the test, and perhaps that is why it still stands, because humanity continues to ask, and because the question itself is the offering. So the seal of silence endures, not carved in stone, but woven in thought. Each denial, each censorship, each forgotten report is another layer of protection. Beneath it, the truth sleeps. Above it, the world pretends to forget. But the Sphinx remembers. It always remembers. And somewhere beneath its pores, the silence waits, not for permission, but for resonance. One day, when the right question is asked in the right tone, the stone may answer. And when it does, the sound will not be loud. It will be a whisper, quiet enough to shake the world. Every portrait hides a double. Every face that looks upon the world casts another into shadow. The Sphinx, eternally gazing east toward the dawn, may not be the only guardian of Giza. For centuries, travelers have whispered of another, a twin buried beneath the sands, a mirrored lion sleeping opposite his brother facing the setting sun. To speak of it is to step into heresy against archaeology, yet the rumors persist, carried by old texts, by local legend, and by the geometry of the plateau itself. In 1817, British explorer Henry Salt, noted something peculiar in his sketches of the Giza horizon. He recorded that the terrain appears to suggest a symmetry not yet uncovered, hinting at another monumental form west of the Nile's ridge. Local Bedouins told him of a second lion, whose head had long been swallowed by the desert, visible only after storms when the sand shifted. Salt dismissed it as superstition. Yet later, travelers described similar shapes emerging briefly from dunes. A mound curved like the shoulder of a great statue half visible at sunset. Then, as always, the wind reclaimed it. By the 20th century, the theory of a twin sphinx had become a fringe curiosity. Yet geometry, patient and incorruptible, does not lie. The Great Sphinx faces precisely east, aligned with the rising sun. Its symmetry demands a counterpart facing west. Ancient Egyptians built in pairs, twin temples for balance, twin obelisks to mirror the heavens, twin statues guarding gates. Even the pylons of their sanctuaries represented duality. Day and night, birth and death, the seen and unseen. Would they have left their greatest guardian alone? Some evidence suggests they did not. In the 1990s, satellite imagery of the plateau revealed anomalies in the western sands, linear formations resembling foundations, directly opposite the Sphinx's position. They form a rough mirror, aligned along the same axis. When these coordinates were compared to older maps from Napoleonic surveys, the anomaly fell on a spot once marked Structure FSA, grazed structure. Whatever stood there had already vanished 2 centuries ago. It is possible that time simply devoured it, a second monument worn to dust by the same floods that scarred the first. Yet there are stranger possibilities. In 1936, a team from the Egyptian Antiquities Department excavated a section west of the Sphinx and discovered a massive limestone block shaped unnaturally smooth, buried beneath 20 meters of sand. It was never fully unearthed. The lead archaeologist, Selim Hassan, mentioned it briefly in his report. A worked stone of unusual contour, possibly a fragment of colossal sculpture. The dig was halted, and the site never reopened. To those who believe in the Sphinx's twin, this was confirmation. But Egyptology, it was an inconvenience. The narrative allowed only one lion. 2 would imply intention, and with it, meaning too vast to fit within accepted chronology. Legends from the Arab Middle Ages echo the idea. Al-Makrizi, a 15th century historian, wrote of 2 great images, one toward the rising of the sun, the other toward its setting. He claimed the second had fallen in an earthquake, before the coming of the Greeks. Earlier still, the ancient Egyptians themselves spoke of dual guardians, the Akeru, 2 lions seated back to back, symbolizing yesterday and tomorrow, guarding the passage of the sun. In their hieroglyphs, the sign of Eka, twin lions facing opposite directions with the solar disk between them, represented the horizon, the eternal gate between light and darkness. If the Sphinx embodies the eastern lion, guardian of dawn, then the missing counterpart must have guarded the dusk, the lion of the setting sun, the keeper of endings. Together they would have enclosed the realm of time itself, their gaze forming the axis of rebirth. One watched the world begin, the other watched it fade, and between them, the Nile, the river of eternity, flowed like the pulse of creation. Could such symmetry be coincidence? The builders of Egypt believed that harmony was divine law. The absence of the second Sphinx may therefore be no accident but a wound. Perhaps the Western Guardian fell long ago, buried by floods or shattered by earthquakes. Or perhaps it was deliberately destroyed, erased in an age when duality threatened orthodoxy. There are whispers of a darker explanation. In the Ptolemaic era, when Greek rulers reinterpreted Egyptian monuments through their own cosmology, the twin lions were associated with Janus, the god of transitions, whose 2 faces looked forward and backward through time. The Greeks saw in them a symbol of forbidden knowledge, of the capacity to see both past and future. Some early Christian mystics later identified this duality with heresy, the ability to perceive beyond revelation. If the twin Sphinx existed, it would have embodied precisely that power, the vision of both beginnings and endings. Destruction then would have been preservation, Gratia as protection. To leave only one lion is to sever the link between yesterday and tomorrow, trapping humanity in the eternal present. The surviving Sphinx, then, is a fragment of a cosmic equation, its twin intentionally silenced. The seal of history was thus complete. One guardian left to watch the dawn, the other buried to conceal the dusk. Modern researchers occasionally revive the question. In 2018, ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted west of the Sphinx's enclosure revealed subsurface irregularities consistent with man-made foundations. The data was not publicly released, but private notes describe a curved anomaly suggestive of sculpted stone. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities dismissed the findings as natural geological formations. The scientists involved were instructed to cease commentary. Perhaps they obeyed, perhaps not. If a second Sphinx truly lies buried, its rediscovery would not only rewrite Egypt's architectural history, but reawaken the myth of dual creation. It would mean that the builders encoded not one guardian of time but two, that their civilization's greatest monument was incomplete in our understanding, severed from its reflection. In Egyptian cosmology, to lose one half of a pair was to unbalance Maat, the cosmic order. Could that imbalance echo still, manifesting as the dissonance of our own age? A civilization that remembers its dawn but not its dusk. Some nights, when the wind blows from the west, locals say they hear a faint echo answering the Sphinx's silence, a hollow sound beneath the dunes, as though another vast hollow body sleeps beneath the desert, listening. It could be mere imagination. Yet the desert has its own ways of remembering, and sometimes it whispers through illusion. If the second Sphinx exists, it is not only buried in sand but in consciousness. Every culture hides its twin, the shadow it cannot face. The visible lion, with its eroded smile, belongs to history, the unseen one, to forgetting. Perhaps they are not two statues but two states of being, matter and memory, waking and dream. And perhaps that is the Sphinx's final riddle, that it has never been alone, only half awake. That its twin is not lost but waiting, buried not in the desert but within us, beneath the layers of time and disbelief. Someday, when the sands shift again and the western horizon breathes, the lion of dusk may rise. And when it does, the two faces will look upon each other once more, dawn meeting dusk, beginning meeting end, and the circle of memory will close. Until then, one lion watches and the other dreams, and between them we walk, half seeing, half remembering, never whole. It begins, as all awakenings do, with a dream. In the mid-14th century BCE, before his crown and before his name was written in gold, a young prince lay sleeping in the shadow of a half-buried lion. The desert winds had swallowed the Sphinx almost to its neck. Only the solemn face, its eyes fixed upon the horizon, remained above the dunes. The boy's name was Thutmose, son of Amenhotep II. He had hunted all day and fallen asleep beneath the ancient statue, exhausted, and as the sun dipped westward, the dream began. He dreamed the Sphinx spoke. Its voice was neither thunder nor whisper, but something between breath and eternity, a vibration felt more than heard. It called itself Hamarkes, Horus of the horizon. It promised him kingship if he would clear away the sand that choked its body. When Thutmose awoke, the desert was silent, yet the echo lingered in his bones. He returned to the site days later with laborers and began to dig. Years afterward, as Pharaoh Thutmose IV, he commemorated that vision in stone, the famous dream stela, still standing between the pores. The inscription describes the encounter as divine blessing. but its language hides layers of older meaning. "I am your father," the Sphinx says. "I give you the kingdom." To modern ears, it sounds like simple prophecy. Yet to an initiate of the ancient priesthood, it would have carried another resonance. Father was the title of those who guarded the mysteries, and kingdom meant not land, but knowledge. The Sphinx was offering initiation, the inheritance of what had been buried beneath its feet. Why did the dream appear then, after centuries of silence? Some believe Thutmose's vision was no accident, but the continuation of a ritual that had slumbered since pre-dynastic times. The priests of Harmaches had long vanished, their rites forgotten, yet the monument remained sensitive to certain alignments. The angle of sunrise, the precession of the stars, the vibration of the Earth's own field. Perhaps in that moment of cosmic symmetry, something reawakened, and the prince's dreaming mind became the instrument. Archaeologists often treat the dream stela as political propaganda, a story crafted to legitimize Thutmose's claim to the throne. But the text does not read like triumph. It reads like confession. The young ruler writes of awe or of terror, feeling enclosed within the breath of the god. The Sphinx did not command him to rule, it commanded him to remember. The excavation he ordered may have been both physical and symbolic, the uncovering of stone and memory alike. When workers cleared away the sand, they exposed the Sphinx's chest for the first time in perhaps 1,000 years. Some records hint that the excavation reached deeper than the surface. Fragments of early restoration masonry, now lost, suggest that a small cavity or shaft existed beneath the chest, later sealed. Thutmose's engineers filled cracks with new limestone and rebuilt the pores, perhaps to stabilize, perhaps to conceal. The stela itself may have been placed there not only as memorial, but as seal, a guardian over what was re-entombed. There are strange details in the stela's iconography. Above the text, Thutmose is shown making offerings to two identical sphinxes, one to the east, one to the west. Egyptologists interpret them as symbolic representations of the same statue, but perhaps they record what once was, the twin guardians of horizon and dusk. The dream, then, would not have been mere vision, but message, a call from the buried twin, urging remembrance through its surviving brother. Dreams in Egypt were not private phenomena. They were portals. Priests of the Temple of Serapis practiced incubation, sleeping within sanctuaries to receive divine counsel through visions. The dream was an instrument of revelation, not imagination. Thutmose's vision fits precisely within that ancient technology of consciousness. To dream beneath a sphinx was to lie upon the threshold of two worlds, the physical above and the remembered below. The line between sleep and initiation blurred until one became the other. Modern psychology would call this projection, the mind's echo of desire. But the Egyptians believed the dreamer became the vessel through which the monument itself could speak. Stone was not inert, it was memory condensed. When aligned with human perception, it could transmit. Perhaps the voice that addressed Thutmose was not divine at all, but geological. The resonance of the Sphinx amplified through his half-sleeping brain, translated into words his soul could understand. After the restoration, Thutmose IV's reign was marked by peculiar devotion to celestial order. He built shrines to the sun, recalibrated the calendar, and sponsored priests who studied stellar movements. His tomb's ceiling is painted with the stars of the northern sky arranged in spirals, a rare design meant to symbolize precession, the slow turning of the heavens. It is as though his dream had awakened not only ambition, but astronomical awareness, knowledge older than the dynasties themselves. Yet for all his reverence, the Sphinx soon fell silent again. Within centuries, sand reclaimed its body. Later kings restored it briefly, then abandoned it. Each rediscovery was followed by burial, as if the monument demanded cycles of concealment. The dream stela endured, but its message grew opaque. Scholars read it now as myth, not memory. But consider this. If the Sphinx communicates through vibration, through dream, resonance, and silence, then perhaps it has spoken to others since Thutmose. Perhaps the dream continues, carried through generations, appearing to those who stand at the edge of knowing. Poets, mystics, even scientists have described feeling watched at Giza, as though the monument recognizes inquiry. Could the same frequency that once reached a sleeping prince still pulse beneath the pores, waiting for another receptive mind? In 1926, during restoration, workers reported hearing a hollow moan as they drilled into fissures under the monument's chest. Their overseer dismissed it as air escaping, but one man, an elderly foreman, later told his grandson that he felt dizzy, as if dreaming while awake. It was as though the stone were breathing, he said, like something remembering my name. Maybe Thutmose was not chosen, but simply present, the first to listen when the earth spoke. In the hieroglyphs of the Drum Stela, the word for voice is Nes, the same root as Nesut, king. To rule was to hear. Kingship itself was defined by receptivity to the divine word. If so, then the dream did not grant Thutmose power. It tested whether he could listen. The real initiation was not the throne, but the awakening of memory, a lineage of hearing that runs beneath dynasties, beneath faith, beneath time. Today, tourists stand between the pores and take photographs where the young prince once lay sleeping. They see a monument, not a dream. Yet perhaps, in the quiet moments before sunrise, when the plateau still trembles with the cool breath of night, that vibration stirs again. Not loud, but insistent. A question, carried on frequencies too subtle for machines to record. What if the dream of Thutmose was never meant to end? What if it is humanity's dream, the slow remembering of something buried within us all? The lion still faces the horizon, patient, waiting for another to sleep beneath its gaze. When that dream comes again, it will not speak in words, but in resonance. A reminder that the throne it offers is not of gold, but of awareness. And perhaps then, when we finally learn to listen as he did, the sands will loosen once more, and the buried will rise, not monuments, but memory itself. There are silences that feel alive, as though they breathe with us, move through us, and remember what we have forgotten. The desert around Giza is one of those silences. It stretches like an ocean made of time, waves of sand rising and falling in slow motion. Somewhere beneath that golden stillness lies what seekers for centuries have called the chamber of stillness, the last threshold under the Sphinx, the heart of its enigma. It has been whispered about in prophecies, encoded in ancient maps, even glimpsed in the frequencies of seismic instruments. Yet no one has seen it. Or perhaps someone did, and chose not to speak. The idea of a hidden chamber beneath the Sphinx has haunted the modern imagination, since the first radar scans in the 1970s hinted at geometric cavities under its pores. But the myth is much older. In the writings of Hermetic sages, there is mention of a vault of eternity, sealed before the deluge, where the records of those who knew the stars were kept. In later centuries, mystics renamed it the Hole of Records, and clairvoyants like Edgar Cayce claimed it would be discovered when the world is ready to remember itself. Scholars dismiss this as fantasy, yet every decade the instruments return, and every time they detect something that should not be there. Symmetry where nature makes none, echoes where stone should be silent. If such a chamber exists, it would rest 20 meters below the surface, directly beneath the Sphinx's chest, a place where many ancient depictions show a small doorway or niche. The Dream Stela of Thutmose once stood atop that spot, as if marking a gate that was not meant to open. Later repairs sealed every visible crack, as though fear itself had become mortar. Archaeologists today call these measures structural reinforcement, but the pattern of secrecy stretches too far to ignore. Whenever exploration nears that axis, access is quietly denied, studies postponed, and archives vanish. The silence surrounding the chamber has become its own kind of evidence. To imagine what lies below is to step outside of linear history. Perhaps it is not a room filled with relics, but an experience, an architecture of consciousness. If the builders of the Sphinx encoded vibration and geometry into stone, they may have built not a tomb, but a tuning chamber, designed to resonate with the Earth's own heartbeat. In ancient Egypt, sound and stillness were two halves of one principle. The temple was the place of tone, the chamber, the place of quiet. To enter it was to dissolve the boundary between self and world, to encounter the eternal in the absence of motion. Some accounts, scattered through hermetic fragments and esoteric texts, speak of initiates who descended into the hall of light, beneath the lion to undergo symbolic death. They were placed in total darkness and silence for 3 days, surrounded by the hum of the earth. When they emerged, they were said to carry the memory of before. The chamber was a womb, not a grave. The silence was not emptiness but density, the sound of time folded upon itself. In 1991, when Robert Schoch's team ran seismic tests, they recorded an echo from deep within the bedrock, delayed and faintly harmonic, as though the signal had traveled through a hollow space. One of the researchers later described the reading as a heartbeat within the rock. The data was archived, then quietly forgotten. Officially, the anomaly was labeled a natural fissure, but Schoch once remarked privately that the echo repeated 3 times, evenly spaced, impossible for a random crack. It behaved, he said, like a chamber. What purpose would such a chamber serve? If the Sphinx marks the intersection of cosmic and terrestrial alignments, the node where the frequencies of the planet converge, then the space beneath it might act as a receiver, a kind of memory field. Everything that happens above, every vibration of sound, every footstep, every prayer, would imprint upon it. Over millennia, those imprints would accumulate into a tapestry of resonance, a library of sound, not of words. Perhaps that is what the ancients meant by the Hall of Records, a memory not written in ink but encoded in vibration, waiting for consciousness sensitive enough to read it. In physics, there is a concept called quantum coherence, the phenomenon by which particles separated by vast distances remain linked, mirroring each other's states instantaneously. If consciousness operates in similar ways, then the chamber of stillness might be less a vault and more a mirror, one that connects the human mind to the deep memory of the earth. To enter it would be to enter the planet's own recollection. Some say the chamber has already been found. In 2008, rumors spread among independent researchers that a small sealed shaft discovered near the Sphinx's right paw led to a descending tunnel. The dig was halted by authorities for safety reasons. No photographs were released, but one witness claimed to have seen a polished doorway of basalt unlike any stone used in the monument. He said it drank light, absorbing it rather than reflecting. He was later barred from returning to Egypt. The story has no proof, yet even lies take shape around a kernel of truth. The more official silence grows, the more the myth breathes. If the chamber of stillness is real, then its purpose is not to be opened, but to be remembered. It exists as a teaching, not an object. The Sphinx, immovable and silent, becomes the teacher, and the chamber beneath becomes the lesson. That wisdom lies not in discovery, but in patience. We dig and dig, convinced that revelation waits at the end of excavation. Yet the real excavation must happen within. There is a strange peace that descends upon the plateau at night. The tourists are gone, the lights extinguished, and the air turns cold enough to sting. The stars hang motionless, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. If you stand at the Sphinx's side and close your eyes, the world contracts into stillness. You hear only your pulse, and for a fleeting moment it seems to match another rhythm. Slower, deeper, rising from beneath the earth. It is then that you understand. Stillness is not absence but listening. The earth is listening. The Sphinx is listening. And perhaps, if you're quiet enough, you might hear what it has heard for 12,000 years, the slow unfolding of civilizations, the murmur of languages now dust, the eternal question that outlives every answer. Maybe that is why Egypt guards the chamber so fiercely. To open it would be to confront that question directly, without myth, without distance. And perhaps humanity is not ready to face what it reflects. For stillness, like truth, offers no comfort. It shows only what is. The desert, the lion, the silence. All of them are mirrors. Beneath the pores of the Sphinx, beneath history and denial alike, lies a chamber not of death, but of remembering. Its door is sealed not by stone, but by consciousness unprepared for what it will find. Until we learn to enter in silence, without hunger, without conquest, the chamber will remain closed. But one day, perhaps in a dawn far from now, when humanity has grown quiet enough to listen again, the seal will lift not with noise but with breath. And from beneath the lion, the stillness will rise, vast, luminous, familiar, and the earth will remember its own name.